India and the United States have been locked in discussions for the major part of 2025 regarding a wide-ranging bilateral trade agreement between the two countries. With US President Donald Trump touting heavy tariffs on Indian products as part of his so-called America First strategy, the prime objective of these discussions has been to avoid the brunt of American tariffs on Indian products. The latest news on these negotiations is that a mini deal of sorts, notably excluding sensitive industries like dairy, agriculture and steel, which will be covered in a far more comprehensive deal, negotiations for which began on the 9th of July. For India, the hope is to provide interim relief from President Trump's tariff of 26% on Indian goods, which comes into effect from the 1st of August, should no deal be agreed. India is also looking to expand its footprints across America for the manufacturers of certain automobile parts, as well as reductions in tariffs for steel and aluminium. But keeping aside, of course, some of these very minute and specific topics, I want to take a larger conversation forward with our guests at this point in time. I'm with me Ambassador Manju Seth, former diplomat, Dr. Sharad Kohli, senior economist, Mithali Nikore, economist, Adit Kothari, international affairs expert. With us is also Mr. Raymond Vickery, former US Assistant Secretary of Commerce, who will be joining us very shortly. Let me begin this conversation with Dr. Sharad Kohli. Dr. Sharad Kohli, of course, there's a lot of speculation, certain sectors which are being called sensitive at this point in time that India and US do not want to touch currently. But when we talk about a mini trade deal between India and the US, Dr. Kohli, what do you think that necessarily needs to entail?
Well, good evening, Devika. Good evening to my fellow panelists and Newsx viewers. I think all this hype being created of a deadline of Qayamat ka date of 9 July, you know, I just fail to understand how can trade deals. I personally believe, Devika, that trade between two countries is a natural evolution. It's an outcome of demand and supply. It's an outcome of who makes what better. It's an outcome of the fact that probably I have a climatic advantage, I have a labor advantage, I have a natural resource advantage, and so on and so forth. I think this is for the first time in my life of being in the world of economics for 35 years that I'm seeing that deals are being done with a gun on the head. Do it before 9 July, else we are going to do this. Do it for these items, else we are going to do this. I just fail to understand what is this methodology as far as doing a trade deal is concerned. As far India is concerned, agriculture and dairy is a big no for India. India has drawn a categorical red line. We are primarily an agriculture-driven economy. You know, 50% of our workforce, Devika, still depends on agriculture. How can we allow, you know, the corn and wheat coming from the US, that too genetically modified? We cannot allow. And they also, one of the clauses in the dairy deal says that you bring in the fodder for feeding your cattle here, which contains meat. I mean, here in this country, you know, cow is worshipped. We've got a different set of rules and regulations and we follow a different religion. We cannot allow that to happen. And as of US, you know, the concessions on automobile parts, as you rightly mentioned, we need that one. Steel and aluminium, we need that too. So I think if US tries to push something which is structurally not acceptable to our economy, the structure of our economy is completely different from the way US is. So President Trump will have to understand that if he's got a trade deficit with a country, it is an evolution of trade which has happened between the two countries over several decades. You needed that stuff. We gave it to you cheaper. We gave it of better quality, which is why this trade has shaped. So I think trade shapes in a manner which is developed after decades of dealing with each other. It is an unusual experience for me the way things are happening. I hope some kind of mini deal or some kind of interim deal. No, you know, this is reminding me of a competitive exam where the aspirants go and look, oh, my letter is going to be today. You know, I'll be amongst the 15 nations. My letter is going to be there. I'll be the one who will be doing it. What is this happening? This is not diplomacy. I mean, Ambassador Seth is there. I'm not sure what are our views on that. But this is not the way diplomacy works. This looks like a competitive exam where the aspirants are running to the board where the result is pasted to see if their name appears there or not. After so much of deliberations, I'll be very shocked and surprised if US refuses to, conclude this trade deal into mutual advantage. US wants it to its own advantage. And what is President Trump doing? Once even if this deal is against us, Devika, for a moment, if 26% tariffs are levied, only 3 billion of our exports are going to be impacted. I calculated the whole thing. So what? Just let it be. What's the big deal? For him, it's a big deal. Everything happens through big deal. Today, he gave a statement that if BRICS countries, they get aligned to BRICS or more countries get aligned to BRICS, I'm going to levy, as if it's not tariff. It is an F-35 aircraft. As if it's not tariff, it's a missile. As if it's not tariff, it's a rocket. What is this happening? This is not the way international trade is done. I'm absolutely sorry as an economist. I just can't digest this methodology, Devika. With due apologies.
Okay, I want to bring in Ambassador Manju Seth quickly into the conversation before we move on to Mr. Raymond Vikri. Ambassador Manju Seth, would you agree with that assessment that this does not seem as though the playing field is level or fair?
Sorry, I couldn't get the last part of your question. Devika, could you repeat that, please?
Yes, Ambassador Seth, I'm just drawing upon what Dr. Sharad Kohli has spoken about right now. I want to understand from your perspective, do you also somewhere feel that the way the US is handling the entire situation does not really seem as though it wants any other nation to feel or believe that it's an equal partner as far as trade is concerned?
I think, yes, absolutely. I agree with Professor Kohli. This is not the way that international trade or international trade deals or diplomacy is or should be conducted. But President Trump, I think, is on his own trip, so to speak. He has decided that the US is in a position to lay down the terms and conditions of engagement with every single country, whether friend or foe or rival. He has just gone, full steam ahead with his own thinking. And yes, if this small mini deal that is being spoken about between the US and India, if eventually, I think, because India has gone ahead in these negotiations for the so-called mini trade deal also after due consultation with all stakeholders in India. And I think there will be some short-term, harm or disadvantage to them for a short time, given that their export market. I mean, it's 3 billion, but still for the small MSMEs and small foundries and small steel and aluminum manufacturers, etc. There will be some short-term pain, and they will have some issues. But overall, I think India cannot completely overlook our interest, and I think the US also should understand, and they do understand overall, that it has to be in mutual interest. It cannot be totally a one-sided negotiation or a one-sided imposition of trade terms. And if you recall, it's the US and the other Western countries which have laid down were at the forefront of the WTO and the rules-based order. And now to completely, go against it and nullify it, I think is something which is unprecedented. But I think that's the way President Trump functions, and that's the way he would like to approach, things. And he has upended the entire system everywhere. So I think that we have to keep in mind, and we have to find ways of negotiating and keeping our red lines in mind. And we have to, find something which is mutually beneficial, mutually useful. And I think the US will also, in our negotiations, that would have been conveyed, because if you recall, Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal said very clearly, categorically, that we cannot have deadlines only. We have to ensure our interests first and foremost. So these letters that are coming out, let's see what they say.
Okay, I want to bring in Mr. Raymond Vikri as well. Mr. Vikri, I want to understand from your perspective, sir. Beyond perhaps immediate tariff adjustments, how do you think an interim deal between India and the US will strategically position both the nations for a broader bilateral trade agreement, which is targeted for later this year?
Well, thanks very much for having me. I think it's absolutely necessary to build peace and prosperity internationally, that these two great democracies, India and the United States, be able to cooperate economically. if you can't cooperate economically, it has a spillover effect in strategic matters, particularly vis-a-vis China. It has a spillover effect in regard to cooperation in the Quad with Japan, Australia, as well as the U.S. And India. That having been said, cooperation is not the modus vivendi, modus operandi of President Trump. His orientation is that of the real estate developer, that everything is a transaction, that we agree on one particular transaction. I win, you lose, and it's to my advantage. And that's what he means by America first. I think it's absolutely correct that it's very unfortunate that the U.S. and India, having founded the World Trade Organization together, and before that, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, are now faced with a new proposition, and that is bilateral transaction on each and every trade issue. Those things are reality. There is also a political reality. India needs to be able to placate, if you will, Donald Trump. Donald Trump needs very, very much to have an announcement today of some deal. Again, the way in which he typically operates is to create a problem, which he did on April the 2nd by announcing the so-called Liberation Day, the ridiculously high tariffs based really on nothing but some sort of presumption about the trade deficit. He really doesn't understand trade deficits. He thinks it's some sort of profit and loss. But he needs to be able, and he will announce this as a huge victory. And I fully expect that the Indian authorities, following that, those of the UK and Vietnam, will help him by saying, yes, this is a terrific victory. But it isn't really at all. What it is ameliorating a problem which he has created. So this so-called mini deal will have some purchases probably that India intended to do anyhow. We'll have some lessening of tariffs, which India needs to move forward to. President Trump is right. India has been a very, very high tariff nation. That may have served it when it had infant industries. It no longer is in that position. Yes. So it needs to be able to compete. So I think that there will be an announcement. Both sides will indicate it as some sort of triumph. But it really, as previous speakers have said, is not the way to run an international trade system, and is in derogation of what has gone before for the last 80 years, and in the longer run is not helpful to the U.S.-India relationship.
Ms. Fikri, is the trade deals and the tariff talks with different nations having any sort of an impact on the American economy, which is possibly raising questions about Donald Trump's ability to perhaps undo some of what people are claiming to be, a diplomatic disaster?
You're breaking up somewhat, but what I understand the question is will it have a domestic impact? Yes, of course, these do have a domestic impact. In the United States, it has been shown through the polling that this idea of tariffs is not popular. And it will raise inflation rates in the United States, according to almost every mainstream economist. So this is a mistaken view, but President Trump has shown himself to be, as we used to say in the United States, a Teflon politician, where things seem to just wash off him and don't have at least immediate consequences. We have two elections coming up in Virginia and New Jersey this year. We have midterms next year. This sort of approach may appeal to the base in the United States, the Make America Great Again adherents. But for the wider population, it is not helpful to him politically, and is going to hurt the average man and woman as consumers in the United States.
Okay, on that note, Mr. Bikri, before I let you go, one last question. There's a lot of reports that are now circulating that there are insiders from Trump's team, President Trump's team, who've claimed that the tariffs and the threat of tariffs was simply a bargaining chip by President Trump, that the US was not really going to implement and enforce some of those tariffs eventually. However, do you see Donald Trump's plan having some sort of real impact or enough of an impact on the American economy for him to justify what is expected to cause some sort of an economic slowdown, at least in the coming few months?
The markets in the United States have already discounted a lot of what President Trump is trying to do. You've heard the acronym TACO, Trump always chickens out. There was to be an announcement of a lot of deals, and yesterday the Secretary of the Treasury said, well, there are letters that are going to go out for August 1. In a way, the amelioration of this wrong approach is that Trump is very much concerned about the markets, and when the markets turn south, turn badly based upon the tariffs, he tends to back off. And backing off has already occurred when you say, no, it's not July 9, it's August 1. I do think the United States and India will continue to negotiate. When we first started this, and before Trump came up with this idea of Liberation Day on April 2nd, the United States and India were shooting for something more substantive in the fall. Indeed, in Trump 1, the United States and India had come closer to a freer trade and a deal and a bigger deal. So in a way, this is backtracking, but it's going to be on the agenda between the United States and India for some time to come, and rightly so, because economics and security are all intertwined, and these two great democracies are going to need to cooperate to solve a wide range of problems in the world.
Right, absolutely. Mr. Bikri, thank you so much for joining us in Newsx with your perspective on what's expected to be a promising mini deal, but of course only time will tell. Let me bring in Mithali Nikore at this point in time. Mithali, why then is now the critical moment for India and the US to finalize even a partial trade agreement, particularly given the looming tariff deadlines?
Yeah, absolutely, Devika. You know, today I'm actually in New Jersey, and it was interesting to hear Mr. Bikri talk about the upcoming elections in New Jersey, because I've been talking to a lot of people over here, and there is a lot of concern around the cost of living, right? Amongst average Americans today, the biggest concern is the cost of living. The cost of eggs has actually shot up almost 40% in the last 2 weeks because of some crises that have happened in the US, because of shipments that have been delayed. They are worried that, when you bring in the kind of tariffs that President Trump is talking about, the cost of everyday goods and services, the cost of everyday food items in particular, is something that is really worrying the average American. So, this deal that we're speaking about today, of course, Indo-US deal does not have as much to do with the overall economic scenario in the US, because obviously it's a smaller amount. But at the same time, this is part of a larger conversation that's happening here in the US amongst average Americans, to say, what does this mean for my everyday life? What does this mean for my, grocery bill that I get at the end of the month? And I think the concern, really becomes very critical, to say, when the cost of living increases in such a way overnight, how do you deal with that situation? Because it's not like wages are going up. It's not like, the employment situation is improving. I'm speaking to a lot of young graduates. I've been going around to different universities. I was at Princeton yesterday. And, young graduates who are coming out, they're not as hopeful about the future as, they would have been maybe 3 years ago, because the job market itself over here is so tight. It's not very clear that, they're actually going to get the kind of opportunities that they've graduated for, or that they've studied for. So I think the overall direction, and also the big conversation here that we're seeing in the US, is around the one big beautiful bill, which actually was passed by the House of Representatives, and the president will soon sign on it. Now, just think about what that means. It means that there's a lot of tax cuts. Yes, those tax cuts are good. But at the same time, there's a huge cut in Medicaid, there's a huge cut in food stamps, there's not enough investment in the crumbling infrastructure around the country. I mean, I've been taking trains, I've been taking buses here, because, we are so used to public transport coming from India, right? And here you basically cannot rely on public transport, because there's hardly been any investment over so many decades in public transport, or in
Yes.
the kind of infrastructure that we're used to. So, honestly, the cost of living for the average American is the number one concern. And all of these different developments come and contribute to that.
Okay, but Adit, on that note, since the Americans are all about America first, I want to understand from you India first. In the context of the evolving global trade dynamics, and as Mr. Vikri was also pointing out, we've been reading about the US and China. That was a sour point as far as Trump's first presidency was concerned. It again becomes a sour point in the second presidency. But how does this India-US trade deal serve India's long-term strategic interests in your perspective? Is there something that India can use as a bargaining chip vis-a-vis, the US's current problems with China?
Sorry, Devika, I think the audio is really poor. So I'll try and answer to the best of my ability of what I've understood from the question. So I think the question predominantly looks at India access versus China, and how we sort of compete during Trump's second presidency. So obviously, the second presidency has started off in a rather, Trump style, the usual megalomaniac style of politics, which is very undiplomatic, of any president. We've had number of presidents that we've dealt with in the past, but never somebody as undiplomatic as Donald Trump, as we've seen seen his conduct over the past few months. And when he talks about these trade deals and the way he's going about conducting himself, uh, there goes to show that global trade at general is held hostage by this one person, and the whims of this one person basically has multiple multiple consequences to the food and consumption items that people like you and I are basically are sort of dependent on. From an India perspective, from a larger India perspective, even if he was to, ensure this 26% duty was levied on India, the cost of that 26% is roughly on a 5.5 billion trade deficit that India would basically have. Typically, the industries which India would be really hurt by are the exports of prawns and shrimp, and in addition to kitchen toilet and linen equipments. I mean, those are the kind of domains where we are going to be hit. So out of the 100 billion trade that India currently does with the United States, I think the 5.5 odd billion is where we currently see that risk at. So I think India is not pressed that much to get on the table and iron this out. I think it's more pressing for the United States to essentially demonstrate that we have India backing us. At this point, the only country that they've really signed a deal with is Vietnam, and that was also purely on the pressures that 28% of Vietnamese exports currently go to United States, which is why they were able to arm twist Vietnam to sort of sit down on the table and sign that deal. So I think India needs to calibrate its position very well, which I think the Commerce Minister has demonstrated. And as a consequence, slowly, allow, the census to prevail within all of the other people within Trump's cabinet who understand, how important, trade deals are. And, you cannot allow, global trade to basically be held hostage by one person's whims and fancies. Devika.
Absolutely. On that note, I thank all of our guests for joining us on the broadcast to take that conversation forward. We leave it there. We have some breaking news coming in. Pakistan Field Marshal. All right. We slip into a very short break.